Good morning, everyone, on this Saturday morning. My name is Caleb Cody. I'm a Word of Life missionary down here in the Atlanta, Georgia area. So we are so glad you guys are participating with us. We hope all the sessions today will be an encouragement to you. Chris did a great job just with a quick challenge there, reminding us all the importance of being connected. And we're excited about all these breakout sessions we have for you as well. So thank you for joining this one where I'll be your host here, getting everything, making sure we're good in Zoom. And our teacher today is Miss Chrissy Garland. Let me spotlight her there. And so Chrissy will be teaching us today, and she is a certified counselor, and she is teaching on ministry in dark times. So I'll remind you too, if you go back to the site, if you haven't already, she's provided some resources for you guys, and you can easily download those resources just clicking on the button there on this session if you haven't done that already. Just want to go over a few things, remind you that if you click on the chat bubble down at the bottom of your screen, then you can pull up chat there, and everybody just say, hey, where you're watching from, so you can get familiar with that, as well as feel free to type questions throughout. If you want to say, oh, that's good, or hey, what about this? And then I will take notes of a few questions for our discussion time here in just a few minutes after Chrissy is done with her teaching. So I think that's enough of me talking. I'm going to pass it over to Chrissy, and make sure you can be unmuted there. All right. There we go. Chrissy, take it away.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank y'all so much just for being here and for allowing me to come and share with you guys. And like Caleb said, I hope this is just a time where we can just sit in community, and if you have questions, please write them down. I'm not a great multitasker, so I don't know if Caleb's monitoring the questions, but I'm looking at the chat as well, and so it looks like y'all are from all over. So I just want to say thanks to Word of Life too, for taking the time to take this unique time with COVID and everything going on to be creative and to create a leadership conference like this. And I just am amazed how God can even use Zoom like to just further his kingdom's work. And I do have to admit something to you though. This is my first Zoom conference, and I do a lot of telehealth therapy, but this is my first Zoom conference. And yesterday I went to the local coffee shop, and the guy serving me coffee asked me, he said, what are you working on? I said, well, I told him what I was doing, and he said, is it in person or over Zoom? And I said, it's over Zoom, and it's my first time. And he said, oh. And I said, what is that response? And he said, it's just a little awkward. And that's the advice. I said, is that the best advice you could give me? And he said, it's a little awkward. So I'm going to try to make this as comfortable and not awkward as possible. And I do want you to ask questions. I'm very open, and I enjoy just talking with people and also hearing points of view and your personal stories as well. So just want to open that up from the beginning, that's something that I want y'all to feel safe to ask the hard questions and to talk about some of this stuff, because we are going to talk about a lot of heavy stuff today. But before we begin, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about me. My name is Chrissy Garland. I am a mom. I have 3-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, Joa and Selah, and they are very, very busy. They keep me very active and very tired a lot. So, but they're amazing. And I'm also a licensed professional counselor, and I'm a trauma care specialist. I am certified in trauma care, and that's really my specialty. And I live in Texas. So I'm in Texas right now, but I work for an organization in Florida called Care for Pastors. And I don't know if anyone's heard of that organization, but it is a national organization and ministry that works with pastoral families. And I believe it's on your resource list if you want to download it. But what we do at Care for Pastors is we provide resources, support, encouragement, and counseling services to pastors, to pastor spouses, to their kids. And we also go into churches and help train staff to be a healthy environment for their staff, but also so that they can lead their church family from a healthy place. And so Care for Pastors does a lot, and I absolutely love what I get to do. And some of you may be thinking, why do you do trauma care for pastors? And I assume most of you are not surprised by that. If you serve in ministry in any way, it can be very stressful, and it also can be very isolating. And that's why ministry is a calling. And I'm assuming most of you are ministry leaders in some form, and you know it's a calling because it's not easy. It's not easy, but you know it's needed, and it is so important. And I love ministry. I gave my life to Jesus at 6. I surrendered my life to ministry at 16, and my dad is still a pastor, and I grew up a PK, and I knew at 16 I just wanted to be a part of kingdom work, and I wanted to help people and share the gospel with people. And so I went on to seminary, and that's where I got my master's in marriage and family counseling, and that's where I met my amazing husband, who actually grew up in Word of Life. And many may know my last name, so you know who that is. But we met at seminary, and he went on to be a pastor after seminary. And I'm going to share a little bit about our story throughout this training and be vulnerable and open with you, because that's a big heart behind why I'm sharing today and talking with you today. But I definitely want to start off in prayer, if that's okay, and then we'll dive right in. So let's pray real quick. Father, I just thank you so much just for the opportunity, God, to come together in unique ways, God. And you never cease to amaze us. You don't, God. And your love is so incredible, God. And you equip us to go and to love others, God, to share your love with them, to share the gift of salvation to them, Lord. And I just pray for each individual that's in this room today, God, that you will speak to them individually. God, that you will press something upon their hearts that you want them to learn, that you want them to do, God. I pray for their ministries and their churches, Lord. And I just pray that you will just be in every session in this conference today. And thank you just for your love and your grace. It's your name I pray. Amen. Okay, so as Caleb said, we are talking about ministry in dark times. And I'm going to talk about that, but specifically, I don't know if you read the tagline, specifically, I'm going to talk about how to work with people who experience depression and anxiety and overall mental health issues. And I'm going to make it personal, and I'm going to talk about how you can deal with it yourself, if that's something you may struggle with. But I'm also going to really focus on how to help others within your ministry and how to help those in your church as well, specifically with the depression, anxiety, and mental illness. And I feel like it's really important just to bring to light how severe these issues have become, especially in the last years. They're not new, but there is a rising epidemic. We're seeing more cases of mental illness. We are hearing about depression and anxiety more. But sadly, we are also seeing pastors taking their lives, and people not getting help, and desperation for whatever reason. And so as a church, and I'll say this many times today, I believe the church should be on the front lines of this and ministering to these people and understanding what mental illness looks like and educating ourselves on it. And to start off, I really want to just tell you some statistics. And I love statistics. They kind of just bring to light the severity of what's going on in our world. And so the American Association of Christian Counselors did a case study, and they found that 70% of pastors battled depression at some point in their ministry. 70%. Barna research came out with that 1 out of 5 people experienced depression. And the CDC says suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 12 to 35. The second. And they say, and the CDC also said that more teenagers and young adults die from suicide than from cancer, heart disease, AIDS, heart defects, stroke, pneumonia, influenza, and lung disease combined. So more teenagers and young adults die from suicide than all of those combined. Each day, and this continues with the CDC, each day in our nation, there's an average of over 4,000 attempts of suicide by young people, grades 9 through 12. And the last one from the CDC says 4 out of 5 teens who attempt suicide have given clear warning signs, and no one noticed. And like I said, I am a marriage and family counselor. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I've been in this field for over 10 years. And I love it. And I know all these things exist, and I had the education that all of these things exist, but I was imprudent to think that it didn't exist inside my world. I thought it always existed for other people who came to see me for counseling, not for the people around me, especially the people around me in church. And I remember back in 2018, there was a pretty famous pastor who had taken his life. And I remember I was sitting at a table with my husband, and we were reading the story about how he struggled with depression and anxiety and how he took his life. And I remember talking with my husband, and we said, this is awful, this is terrible, but we're thankful that it's coming out and it's being addressed. And then that opened up a conversation with my husband to say, hey, maybe this is something we should talk about, because he struggled with clinical depression. He struggled with a lot of deep-rooted emotional issues. And he said, maybe I should get help. It was like that light bulb that said, if this does happen to even pastors and they're talking about it, then maybe we should talk about it. And so we decided that day, as we read that in 2018, that he would get help. But we also were in the ministry and we were helping other people. So we kind of pushed it back because we were ministers. We didn't think we needed to address it right then. And then 6 months later, I found myself at that same table alone. And years of helping people, I wasn't able to help the man that sat right across from me from that table. And my husband was bright, and he was outgoing, and he was fun, and he loved Jesus. He was a great dad and father, and he was a great pastor, yet he was also human, and he was very broken. And like I said, he was diagnosed with clinical depression, and he did seek help for it eventually. He also struggled with opioid addiction. He had the shingles while he was in the ministry, the stress. He also had cancer, and he also had, like I said, just some deep-rooted emotional pain. And he did get clean, and he did start medication for his depression, but in the middle of that fight and trying to figure out and trying to understand what having mental illness really meant, he ended up taking his life. And he left behind him a very heartbroken world. And many people, including myself, have asked what happened. If you knew him, he was just a bright light. He loved life, and they've asked, like, why didn't anyone know? Why didn't he talk about it? Why didn't he reach out? He had a family. He had everything going for him. And I think that's a scary thing about mental illness, especially as Christians, and really about struggles in general, is because we're in these leadership positions, we tend to focus on the people we're ministering to and not focus on where we need ministering to. And we often push it back and hide in silence and think, if we'll just pray more, if we're just more spiritual, then these things will go away. And sometimes that silence and not reaching out and not addressing it can end up in deeper depression and can end up with people thinking about suicide. Because as Christians, especially as church leaders, it's easier to think about those things than to let it out into a world that would not understand and wouldn't accept us. And so we hide, and we don't see the importance of freeing that, of living in freedom and letting God take over, because his biggest work can be found in those broken places. And we need to apply that not just to the people in our ministry, because we teach it and preach it all the time, but we need to also apply it to ourselves. And I want to read something to you. Before my husband had taken his life, I didn't know, but he wrote a lot. He journaled a lot, and I'm thankful for that. But just a couple of days before he died, he wrote this, and I feel like it's ministry in words, and I want to share that with you today. He said, "The truth is, I'm not meant to hide. I'm meant to live in the freedom the gospel has given me. I know we all wish we could erase some dark times in our lives, but all life's experiences, bad and good, make you who you are. Erasing life's experiences would be a great mistake, because mistakes can be our teacher, not our attacker. A mistake is a lesson, not a loss. It's a temporary necessary detour, not a dead end. More than anything, I want my brokenness to enlighten those who find themselves in fear and shame to be able to see his light, to know that Jesus truly is the great Redeemer and Restorer." And this is such an important message, as we're gonna talk more about mental health and all this stuff, but a lot of people hide in shame because we don't talk about it enough. And we see it as something that separates us from God, and we see it as something shameful, when in truth, just like my husband had said and written, you find yourself in fear and shame, but when you open it up, you're able to see his life and see it in action, that he is the great Redeemer and Restorer. And he believed that on his good days, but then on his bad days, it was harder to see. But he understood people's pain in a different way and the need for grace. So this is kind of the message he wanted to share, but he didn't stay long enough to share it. And that's why I'm here today, and I get to be a part of Word of Life to be able to share this message with you all. I'm going to share with you the significance of educating the church on mental illness and the things we don't talk enough about. And I'm going to talk about the importance of creating a culture of compassion in your homes, in your churches, in your ministries, but in your own life, and a culture where the gospel isn't only taught, but also lived out in freedom. Also talk about a culture that can understand and provide a safe place for those battling things like depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses. So where does this start? Okay, this is where we get into the teaching part of it more. You're thinking, okay, this is an epidemic. This is obviously happening. Pastors are taking their lives. More and more people are talking about mental illness, and that's so important. And like I said, the church should be on the front lines of this. But where does this start? Where can you start? And where can you start in creating a culture of understanding? And this is so simple. And every message I give, it always starts here. But it starts with you. We're so others focused in ministry because that's what God has called us to. But we also need to see the importance, and I'm not going to call it self-care because I don't even like that term very much, but to see the importance of evaluating our own lives and our own struggles and identifying them and speaking them out loud and being willing to get help if we need it. And so it really does start with you as individuals, you as leaders, and educating yourself to help understand what is mental illness, what are these things, how do I help people? Education is huge. And so I'm going to, looking at my notes here. We do have a long way to go. There's always something to learn. And we often hear about, like I said, depression and anxiety. And as you've seen in the stats above, it's something the church needs to address. It's something that we need to address. We can't change the world, we can't change the world in one day or one person, but it can start with you. And we can talk about depression. We can talk about all these things all day long. But, and I could talk about mental illness for a very long time, but I'm going to try to summarize a lot today. But really, depression, we're going to talk about signs of it and how you see it in yourself, how you see it in others. But I think there's a common misconception that depression looks a certain way. Like if someone's sad and down, if they're quiet, if they exclude themselves, or if there's a lot going on around them, that's how we usually see depression in others. And that is, sometimes our preconceptions are incorrect on that. Sometimes it can go deeper and people can put on a smile and not even show it. And that's the scary part. And we do that. I mean, as ministry leaders, we learn very early, like how do we hide our pain so that we can minister to others? And that's what I mean. It starts with you, because it starts with you being honest and evaluating yourself. And we see it like in Robin Williams. A lot of the happiest, most talented people we know struggled with deep, deep depression. So we need to educate ourselves on what to look for and kind of get rid of our preconceived ideas about it. And I loved this definition. It says, a mental illness can be defined as a health condition that changes a person's thinking, their feelings, their behaviors, and that causes a person distress and difficulty functioning. And this can be mild and severe depending on the person and their experience. But I really want to talk about 4 ways to better understand mental illness, and how it can be viewed kind of from a holistic approach. Now, it's hard because when I prepare messages, I'm always like, try to get a three-point message. But this one's just going to have a lot of points. So you might want to take notes because I'm going to have a lot of points here. But my first 4 points are going to be about how you can better understand mental illness and see it from a holistic approach. And the first point would be, and that's mentally, physically, scripturally, and spiritually. And mentally, if you see someone struggling, we really look at depression 2 ways as clinicians, and that is, it could be situational. It could be something they're just going through. They're depressed because of things around them. And that's very common. And that's something that you can evaluate yourself. You can evaluate for those in your ministry, in your churches. Is this situational? Is this something that is because of the circumstances around them? Or is it something that's clinical, that's chronic, that goes deeper, meaning that something physically is going on in the brain? And battling mental illness it changes your brain structure, it changes the chemistry, it changes the functions. I don't know if any of you have known or have experienced personally that deep depression. It changes the way you think, the way you act. And this is going to be the biggest message every time I speak, is to see mental illness as a disease, as something some people cannot control. And that is number 1 in educating ourselves. Is as Christians, I address this later on, but I'm going to address it now too. But as Christians, we think we can outpray it, or we can just push it aside, or do more quiet times. And sometimes all that is awesome. And that's the foundation of who we are and how God made us, is our faith and our belief and his creation in us. But mental illness can be a disease, just like cancer, just like heart disease. And you do need more help than just the surface level things. And that leads me to my second one. That's mentally, is physically. Like I said, it is a disease. It can paralyze a person. And if we kind of approach mental illness as we would a disease like cancer, then it normalizes the person. I remember when my husband had cancer, and then we found out about the addiction and the mental illness like the same week. It all happened in 1 week. It was the perfect storm. The way people treated him when he had cancer and the way that people treated him with the other was just completely opposite. And I know there's consequences to the other versus cancer, but he needed the same type of compassion and the same type of help. He needed doctors and resources just as he did for his cancer. And that's how we have to see mental illness. Also physically, and this is some signs you can identify as well. A lot of people who struggle with depression and anxiety see physical symptoms, such as stomach pain, trouble breathing, headaches, and that usually is what leads to panic attacks and anxiety attacks is you can't breathe. And there are a lot of physical symptoms that happen with depression and anxiety. And so that's mentally and physically, scripturally, and these are my favorites, scripturally and spiritually. Scripturally, it's interesting because now that I know more about mental illness and I go back and read the Bible, I'm like, how did I miss this? Because some of the most amazing men in biblical history struggled with depression. They did. And I just read through the book of Job. I was writing a series of blogs for a ministry, and I read through the book of Job, and I was like, how did I miss this? Like, Job struggled, and situational. Let's talk about situational depression. We all know Job. We know his story, and he just continuously cried out to the Lord, continuously. And I have here Job 32, I cry out to you, O God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you only look at me. And I feel his heart here, because in the midst of our struggle, especially if you struggle with depression and mental illness, you can feel that God has abandoned you, because it's difficult to fit your faith with what you're feeling and experiencing. Like, we know this is truth. We know this is truth. But why are we dealing with this? Why are we not getting better? Why? And it's hard to mix those two. And I think Job is a perfect example of this, because he's like, I love the dance between he and God, because he's just like, God, I know you're good. I know this, but this is happening. And I cry out to you, but you don't answer. And that's the battle of mental illness. That is the battle, especially as a believer, because you think you should be this certain way, but you're experiencing this. And that's the struggle. And that's something you have to identify within yourself and within others, that it really doesn't have to do with your faith all the time. Every single time, it doesn't have to do with your faith. Because you can be devoted to the Lord and faithful and still struggle with these things. And that's an important message to share with anyone battling mental illness. Also, Paul understood this. He said, I have chosen to be content in whatever circumstance. And that's Philippians 4:11. And we know that verse very well. And his struggle was, he knew that suffering existed, and he had to go ahead and just choose to be content. And lastly, Psalm 94:19. And I'll tell you this, in my own times of depression, I struggle with situational depression. I have since I was 18, but this verse has always been a light to me. It says, when anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought me joy. And David experienced depression too. And these are Christian men. They're faithful biblical men who knew what it was like to suffer, but continuously turned to God, And their suffering wasn't necessarily taken away. And that's the thing with mental illness. It's not always taken away. And that's the hard part. But to know that God is faithful in the midst of it, and to know that the church will be there for them as they struggle with it. And as believers, we know, like, mental illness, disease, sickness, this is all part of suffering. This shouldn't be new to us. But sometimes we treat different sufferings differently. But I think it's important, and this is a message that needs to be shared with someone who struggles with depression and mental illness, to know that suffering doesn't make us less of a Christian. And it doesn't make us farther from God. And I know that's a belief I've had to battle all my life, that if we struggle, it's going to make us look less of a ministry leader, less of a strong believer, and that if we talked about our struggle, then people would look down on us and not respect us. we have examples in scripture, going back to scripture, that prove that the godliest men struggled with these things. And that should push us forward to know that the stigma needs to change, that stigma needs to change, and it changes. It starts with us. Last one is spiritually. And I kind of touched on this a while ago, but I work with believers. I work with pastors every single day, and who struggle with trauma and depression, anxiety, bipolar. Bipolar is a big one amongst pastors. And they have that divide of struggling between faith and experiences, and how do these work? Like, I'm not supposed to struggle with this because I'm faithful and I'm a church leader, and I see this battle every day. And it's a spiritual battle for a lot of these pastors and leaders. And I just want to reiterate, because you struggle doesn't mean it's always or solely just a spiritual issue. It can be mental, physical, and we can see that scripturally and spiritually. It can be a spiritual issue, definitely, but that as Christians should not be the first thing that we jump on, because it does cause shame. That's why people don't reach out, because they're like, no, I'm doing everything right, but I'm still struggling. And that's why people don't talk about it, because the fear of immediately being looked down upon, or saying, just pray more, or do your quiet time more. And I remember watching my husband go into his room when he had a bad day, and he was like, I just need to pray more. I must have done something to God. I must have done something to God, is what he said. I must not have been faithful enough. And I was just like, I didn't really know how to help him then, but I understood that if we looked at it as a disease, then we can see that it's not that he wasn't spiritual enough. We can see that it was an illness. And we can that normalizes the person and makes them feel less shameful. And we have a unique challenge as Christians, because it's important to see mental illness, to see depression, not just as solely a spiritual issue. We need to see it as a holistic issue. Is it the brain? Is it the body? What's going on in your life? And we need to address the spiritual side of it. Of course we do. And as church leaders, and I found myself in this pattern, it is so important that we stop living as if it doesn't exist, as if we can undo it by our goodness, and don't get discouraged when it doesn't go away right away. And the Bible battles this belief. And it says we actually should rejoice in our sufferings. And we all know this verse, and sometimes it's hard to read, but Romans 5:3-5, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance. That endurance produces character. Character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So we know we're going to suffer. We don't know with what. Each of us has different things, but seeing more and more people struggling with mental illness and depression, and that is the thorn in their flesh. That is their suffering. And we need to acknowledge that it's okay. It's okay, because we all do it. And actually, the Bible invites us to understand that it's okay, because we have hope through Jesus Christ and through the Holy Spirit that is at work within us every single day. So, back to the question, where does understanding mental illness, how to talk about it, how to work with others who are struggling with it, where does it start? And I'm going to go back to, it starts with you. So those 4 things are understanding the holistic approach to it. And this one is just really, I want to get personal and talk about evaluating yourself. Because I think as ministry leaders, we put pride in ourselves as being examples. And so we do things right. But sometimes we need to also be examples of when we are struggling, so that people know we're human, so that people know, hey, they're struggling and this is how they're handling it. And so evaluating where you're at, and maybe what you are personally struggling with, maybe what you need to give to the Lord. acknowledging that we're humans. Even if we're church leaders, we are still human. And maybe even asking the Lord to talk about what you are struggling with and how you should share that with those around you, or how you should get help. As pastors and church leaders, we have such a deep purpose to point people to Jesus, to help other people. Like I said, it's a calling, but it's a position, and we put ourselves as public figures of strength and of purpose. But we also take on so much pressure from performing and from being those type of leaders. How cool would it be to relate to someone if you just opened up, if you allowed the Lord to use that struggle in your life, or the fact that you might struggle with depression? How cool would that be to relate to the people in your ministry and they open up because you did? And I understand being a ministry. I'm a pastor's daughter. I was a pastor's wife. I understand that's hard because we fear so much from being open about our own struggles. And for some reason, mental illness, depression has a stigma that it's shameful and that it means we're not close to God. And that's what we need to change as a church. That's what we need to change as believers. And sometimes that change starts with you just saying, I need help, or I need to talk to somebody, or I need to be more open about that. And I just love the thought that when we are open, and I've personally experienced this, I didn't have a choice to. This is the problem. When my husband died, most people knew about our struggles. He died by suicide. Most people knew that. And it was almost a gift to me because I didn't have to hide anymore. I was given an open door to say, hey, God said, Chrissy, let me use this. You can hide in shame, or you can let me use this. And I said, okay, God, I felt like I had nothing to lose. And so I had the unique ability to be able to share openly, hey, this is a struggle in our life. And we have been hiding it because we didn't want people to look down on us. We didn't want people to, and God's like, that's not what it's about. It's about my work in people's lives. And I want to use what I'm doing in your life to help other people. God equips us, and he works in our broken places. So I think as ministry leaders, it's important that we set the example, not just on being good and being spiritual and knowledgeable in scripture, but also set the example of what God's grace looks like in our brokenness and in our struggles. And here's some things that you can apply in your own life. Another 4 points that you can apply in your own life, but also that you can encourage other people who may come to you to do as well. But as leaders, you set the example. Number 1 is talk about it. That's very important, is to share. And I'm not saying go and share your whole life story and share every detail, but share about it. Ask the Lord for discernment on what to share with other people. And don't hide it. Don't push it back, because that's what we did. And it didn't help us. That's what a lot of pastors do. And it usually ends up badly. Give whatever you might be struggling with. If it's mental illness, depression, give it freedom. Talk about it. Number 2, practice disciplines that help connect you to God. And that's prayer, silence, scripture reading, meditation, staying rooted and connected in your relationship with the Lord. Those disciplines are very important. I'm doing a study on, it's neurology. It's the study of the brain. And Dr. Caroline Leaf said they did a study with people over an 8-week period of time. And these people prayed 20 minutes every day, intentional prayer. And by the end of the 8-week period, they were they showed less signs of anxiety, less signs of depression. They were more socially interactive, more compassionate towards people. And that was 20 minutes of prayer a day. So our disciplines, our spiritual disciplines, are very important. Also relationships and community with God and others. I guess y'all talked about staying connected earlier, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit towards the end here in a minute, but relationships and community are important. And that goes with talking about it and being open and allowing people to be a part of your life, and having that community that supports you, whatever you're struggling with. Number 4, seek help. And I'm going to rest here for a second. I think churches, and this is why I was called to marriage and family counseling and the local church, churches should be the first place that people come to. And we should have the resources and the compassion to take in anyone and to help them. And I think it's important that we be willing ourselves to get help when we need it and encourage other people to. And I'll talk, like I said, I'll talk about this later, but the importance of seeking help, that medication sometimes is needed. Christian counseling is amazing for anybody. Medical doctors are sometimes needed. And being open to all of these resources is important as the church. And we should be ready to provide those resources when people come to us. And number 5, actually 5, keep fighting. Keep fighting. Don't give up. It says run the race, that we will reap a harvest one day. And that's hope. Instilling hope and keeping the fight going is so important, because one day we know as Christians that we will reap a harvest. So that's 5 things you can do for yourself and for others. Talk about it, practice the disciplines, relationships and community, seek help, and keep fighting. And that's for yourself. So I really want you to process and evaluate, what can I do for myself? Where am I struggling? How can I lead by example? And also that's self, and this is others. And this is where the ministering to other people comes in. I hope you see the importance that the role of the church should be in this epidemic of depression and mental illness. And I hope you see that the church needs to be on the front lines, that the church needs to be the first place people run and needs to provide these resources. And we need to let other people know that the church is going to be the place that loves them if they do open up about these struggles. And so I'm going to give you some practical ways on how to take this information and talk about mental health and really try to get help for people within your church and ministry. Number 1 is address it, talk about it. I encourage you to do messages on it. I encourage you to have one-on-one conversations, bring it up, because I've seen where pastors have brought it up and people fled forward, because just talking about it, just saying it out loud has given people the comfort in knowing they can have the confidence in talking about it. Address it. Notice the signs, and this is really important. I went ahead, I know the signs just from education, but this is what other people said. I had about 50 people tell me they know they're depressed when this, and I want to share some of these signs with you. Trouble making decisions, unclear in hearing from the Lord, out of control, intrusive thoughts, withdrawing, loss of interest, not eating, isolating, more irritable, tired, crying often, want to sleep more, hard to understand my emotions, and feeling heavy and weighted. And again, I know we are short on time, but if you need some of these things, reach out to me. I do not mind sharing my notes with you. But those are just some signs you can look for. Number 4 is partner with the community and provide resources. Know the Christian counselors in your area and partner with them. And I gave you a list. They're not in your community, but these are lists of places that you can find good Christian counselors. And number 5 is create a safe place. And this is our last point. So often people are scared to go to church because they don't feel safe. And we can't control everything, but like I said, it starts with you and your ministry and how you love people. And I heard this TED Talk and it was incredible. It was actually about addiction, but I apply it to community because this man who was an addict most of his life said the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is actually community. And I actually took that and I apply it to mental health too, because that community, that support, that those people that surround you and constantly point you to truth and to Jesus, and that's the church. That should be the church. And so the opposite, I'm going to say, is the opposite of mental illness and these struggles of depression and anxiety is community. People that they know will love them, that will do their best to educate and try to understand their struggles. And that should be the church. And so I want to encourage you, wherever you go back to and do your ministries, to implement this. And I know it was a lot. It's like a fire hose right now, but to implement, to see the importance, but also to implement it and to lead by example and to know that this is a growing epidemic and people want to talk about it. They're just ashamed to. And you never know, just by talking about it, by bringing it up, the lives that you can change. So sorry, fire hose, question and answer time.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Chrissy.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys can give Chrissy a big thank you in the chat. We are right on time, but we want to make sure you have time to hop in your next session for session 2. I will ask this one question that Ben Powell asked real quick for a quick response, and it's really practical. So if someone admits to me, hey, I really struggle with depression, what is a practical way to respond to that? You know, a lot of people, it's kind of like, well, I'm sorry for you.
Yeah.
You know, like, what do you say to that? What's just a practical way to respond when someone comes to you and admits that they struggle with depression?
And that's why it helps to educate yourself, just so you're not blindsided, because so many people are. And that's the hard part. That's why a lot of people don't talk about it, is because no one really knows how to respond. My first response would be, I'm here for you. Sometimes people don't want an answer. They just want to know someone's going to be there for them and listen to them. I call it sitting on the bench with them and just saying, what can I do to help? Like,
Awesome.
how can I come alongside you and help you?
Yeah.
And that's when you plug them into resources if they need it, or they may just want you to know.
Right. And as a counselor, you know, I'm sure you would agree that a lot of times the biggest thing is just they need someone to listen to them, right? So starting with, how can I help? They might tell you everything you need to know. I like that answer. Great. Well, we don't have time for any more questions just to stay on track, but I did share Chrissy, since she volunteered, you can reach out to her. I shared her email in the chat. So it's chrissy.garland@yahoo.com. All right. So if you copy that, write that down. You can reach out to her maybe for those list of things to look for. I thought that was really practical and good. There's so much to talk about. Like you said, you could talk about this for a long time. I think I speak for everyone here, just saying thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for just being real and authentic with us, because at the end of the day, that's what we all need. And what a great example that was. I'm going to give everybody a chance to just unmute, say thank you on your way out. You do have another session starting technically in 1 minute. I'm sure we're not the only session running like this, so maybe the second session will be kind of a chill entrance, but we've told everybody to start on time. So I'm going to ask everyone to unmute. You can say thank you on your way out. And we're going to head to our next session. We're going to chill here for a minute.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy.
Thanks, Chrissy. Bye, y'all.
Bye.